Hello and welcome to Infinity. I'm Charlie Seraphin, and this time we're going to be talking about an experience you might have had and never told anybody about. I'm talking about out-of-body experiences. Our guest has done a great deal of research on the subject. His name is Carlos Alvarado. He's from the University of Virginia Medical School's Parapsychology Division. Carlos Alvarado conducted a research project on out-of-body experiences while he was a graduate student at John F. Kennedy University in Orinda. Carlos, what is an out-of-body experience?
An out-of-body experience is basically an experience where the person's consciousness or way of perceiving the environment is located in a place outside the physical body.
Do people have these experiences often?
It's very difficult to make a generalization from the information that we have, but from surveys that have been done, it seems that the experience is fairly common and much more common than is normally realized.
Are there particular circumstances that usually lead to out-of-body experiences?
They seem to occur under a different variety of circumstances. One common factor seems to be kind of some sort of bodily relaxation. Persons that are lying down or just going to sleep. But on the other hand, there is a good number of cases that happen in conditions of shock, such as car accidents and explosions and that type of just sudden accident.
How can you tell an out-of-body experience from a dream?
Sometimes it's extremely difficult to do that. On one side, we can talk of the phenomenology of the experiences, that usually there are some things that are different. On the other hand, there is kind of a assurance on the part of the persons that experience the out-of-body experience to say that their experience is very different to their normal dreams. But that's as far as we can go. Sometimes it's almost impossible to distinguish. Another point that may be made here is that the experience occurs in occasions when the person is not sleeping. He's just walking or doing some sort of activity or just under the influence of a drug or meditating. He's clearly not sleeping, not, as you can see, the person not even using physiological criteria. So in that way we can know that it's clearly different from a dream.
How do you go about as a scientist trying to verify an out-of-body experience?
Well, it's very difficult to verify the experience unless it has we pay more attention to some specific aspects. I'm talking about aspects when the person during the experience is out of the body and he sees or hears something happening at a distance that can later be checked out and sometimes is found to be correct. In that case, we talk about extrasensory perception incidents during the out-of-body experience. So we can verify that aspect of the experience. But generally, the experience as a whole is almost impossible to verify because it's just sensations and very subjective impressions that the person had. We cannot really check because they are just, experiences, what the person has seen, has felt, but there is no way to checking that out in an objective way.
Do people ever report an out-of-body experience as moving physical objects or having any kind of physical reality in their out-of-body experiences?
Yes, it has been reported. It seems to be quite rare in the surveys and the studies that have been done, but there are a few cases reported in psychic literature where the persons report that they felt they were out of their body and they could grab or touch an object and actually move it or change their position, and afterwards they could check that that was actually the case, that the object had changed position or something had happened to it, suggesting a physical action. But they are very rare cases, really.
You mentioned several different situations in which these out-of-body experiences occur. One of them you said is sometimes in the shock and trauma situation when an individual is in a serious accident, and those are the near-death experiences. They have been pretty widely reported, haven't they, where people have felt that they were rising above their body and able to survey the surroundings and see their body and see the other people. And
yes, that's right. Those are a near-death experience seems to be closely related to the out-of-body experience. One thing that distinguishes it is kind of that, by definition, they happen in conditions where the physical body is near death, such as during cardiac arrest or problems with the brain or something that can be medically verified. It seems that some of the near-death reports are a little different from the more conventional out-of-body reports in terms of more the experiences the person had, like seeing lights and a few other elements such as the tonal experience when a person seems to go through a dark tunnel. A few of those characteristics seem to be a little more frequent in near-death experiences than in out-of-body experiences happening in non-near-death conditions. But still, much more research has to be done about it, and we're not very sure, according to the scientific information we have, about how similar or different these experiences are.
I know a man who lives on an island in the Mediterranean who talked to me about out-of-body experiences, and he described it as astral travel. And he said that he was able to lie on his back at night before going to sleep in a very relaxed state and close his eyes and imagine a light, a pure white light above his body, and count backwards from 50 to 0. And by the time he made it to 0, he would be able to escape through that light and claim to have been able to travel outside of his body. Is that a common technique of people who try to consciously achieve out-of-body experience?
Well, there are a variety, very different techniques for trying to induce the experience. The one you mentioned seemed to involve some sort of visualization exercise. There are several of the techniques that kind of use visualization in different ways, like seeing a light or imagining yourself going to a place and then actually you find it and you have induced the experience. Others deal more with relaxation of the physical body or relaxation of the mental state of the person. There are, again, a great variety of techniques, and many of them have worked with some persons, at least that's what they report. But most of them, in fact, almost none of the technique has been carefully evaluated in a scientific way. So we are clearly not sure of what is the aspect of the technique that is really helping to induce the experience and why some techniques are effective with some persons and not with others.
Have you attempted out-of-body experiences as a conscious thing?
You mean if I have had the experience?
Yes.
I have never had the experience. I have tried some of the methods, but up to now I have not been successful, I'm afraid to say.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that it's a function of some very special individuals and that not everyone is capable of having an out-of-body experience?
Well, that's difficult to say. You know, the experience seems to be fairly widespread. Some of the line of research now, especially with spontaneous research in the experience, giving questionnaires to persons that have it, or trying to select from the general population a sample and then applying questionnaires. We're trying to look for psychological correlates or psychological characteristics of these persons that may show that they are different from other persons, so as to explain the experience. Up to now, I will say that we really don't have too much information to say that the person having the OB is different in some way from other persons. But there have been relationships between the experience and the frequency of recollection of dreams and lucid dreaming and meditation. So all those experiences and practices seem to be related in some way to the out-of-body experience, but we really don't know how.
OB is short for out-of-body experience.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
OB, that's kind of used in the literature and with referring to it.
Okay, well, we can use OB too, and everyone will know what we're talking about. In the books written by Carlos Castaneda, there is much discussion of out-of-body experience as an Indian tradition, as something that the Indians have developed for many centuries, and the old wise man is able to teach the skill to the younger person. At times it is a drug-related experience, and other times the drug is not an essential part of the experience of getting out of body. Is it an Indian tradition? Have you been able to trace the origins of the tradition of out-of-body experience?
Well, I really have not made a detailed study of the origin of it, but we know from many sacred texts and a lot of Oriental literature and religious literature all around the world that experience is really very ancient. It can be found in Egyptian literature, in Indian literature, in Buddhistic texts. So I could not say really what's the origin of it, but it's really fairly widespread. Even in the Greek tradition, you can find many of the old philosophers talking about it and talking about ideas of spirit bodies able to go out of the body at will or in some conditions. So the idea is really very old, and there is a lot of literature about that. But in terms of the actual origin, it's really very difficult to trace, when the idea first appeared, or it seems that it has appeared independently in different cultures and probably reflects the reality of the experience. It happens in different places, so it's natural that it may found its way into the literature.
Could you give an example of one of these of the historical or liturgical examples of out of body experience? You mentioned the Egyptian culture,
Yeah.
Asian cultures.
Well, in some of the Egyptian literature, they talk about mostly the process of death. What happens when the person dies and goes to the afterworld, and they kind of explain that the persons have kind of different spirit or subtle bodies, and some people call them, and they describe the process of how it gets out and travels around. And so there we find some of the most ancient ideas of the possibility of doing that sort of thing, but it's mostly connected there with death. Death is seen in all these traditions, and even in current occultism and spiritualism and other traditions like that, death is seen kind of a permanent out-of-body experience. That's how people describe death. Once you get out, you cannot return to the body. So that's kind of the general idea.
I mentioned the man that I had met that practices what he calls astro travel. Could you give current examples from the research that you've done of some of the experiences that people are reporting?
Yes, well, usually the experience, the person in some cases feels kind of gradually getting out of the body. In others, it's just an instantaneous process. He or she sometimes just finds itself out of the body. Then it looks around the surroundings, usually looks and back and sees the physical body sitting down or lying down on the bed. Then the person kind of tends to try to move around. Some of them are able to float and fly around, even pass through the walls, and make observations around. Those observations, sometimes in small percentage of cases, have been checked and have been found to be veridical. Things that were happening at a distance, sometimes quite strange things, not very usual in the person's experiences, and he could check it later. At other times, those perceptions are found to be not very accurate, so it's very difficult to know, what is going on, and we always have to check to see if the person is really seeing something there. There are many other experiences inside the OBE, like some people report meeting with so-called spirits or deceased entities. That sort of thing happens. Some people feel themselves going through a tunnel, usually a dark tunnel or a black space, or just kind of losing consciousness, kind of a blackout at the moment. But it seems to be kind of entering a dark zone. That's kind of the general description. Sometimes they see lights, very brilliant lights, sometimes at the end of the tunnel or sometimes just by themselves. When they look at themselves, when they are out, they sometimes see themselves kind of in a replica of their physical body. Some of them describe it as a spiritual body or their spirit, depending on the person's religious background or whatever. Other persons, when they try to see themselves, just see themselves as kind of pure consciousness, no body at all. And then there is kind of a third group that report kind of very different shapes, such as clouds, energy, pattern waves, or just points in space, a globe of light. That has also been reported. But the most frequent one seems to be kind of the replica of the physical body and the no body at all report. So that's the way they perceive themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Then, yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, usually they travel, they sometimes travel, the surroundings in which they travel sometimes are what some people call of this world surroundings. That means, they see the things that are around us, the buildings, the cars, or whatever. But some other people seem to go into different dimensions, kind of places that are very different, like extremely beautiful places, like a very beautiful garden or with a heaven-like quality. That's usually the way they describe it. Or in small percentage of cases, they go to places that they dislike, kind of very strange and misty places. So there is kind of a great variety of experience. But in terms of surroundings, we can contrast those that we can call kind of this world surroundings and then other dimensions and other world experiences.
Do the people who report out-of-body experiences suggest that they have control over where they're going?
Some of them have, again, it depends on each case. There are some of them just by willing it and by wanting it, they can travel to different places and just be there because they want to be. Others just find themselves going to a place and have kind of no control. They just feel themselves kind of directed or impulsed to go kind of through the tunnel or through whatever thing they are seeing and have no control at all. So it depends. That varies a lot with experience.
Carlos, you were from the University of Virginia Medical School. The University of Virginia Medical School is one of the outstanding medical institutions in the United States. Would you tell me, we talked about it before we began the broadcast, about where the parapsychology department fits into the University of Virginia Medical School?
Yes, it's a division of parapsychology. It's really not an academic department, so we do no teaching, no work with students really. It's mainly a research division. What we do is kind of investigate this type of reports. We have files where we keep all the information, and we do specific studies. Like if we do things on out-of-body experiences, we collect some number of cases, and later try to do some analysis to see what are the characteristics that seem to be recurrent or more repetitive in this type of phenomena, and just try to understand what's the experience and what's behind, what are the mechanisms.
Is it associated with the psychology division?
No, really. Our connection more is with the Department of Behavioral Medicine and Psychiatry. We are kind of a subdivision of that department.
Okay. I'm trying to put myself now in a sort of out-of-body experience in the place of that one individual who I know is listening, who is saying that it is very difficult for them, even in their wildest imagination, to believe that people who report out-of-body experiences are doing any more than fantasizing. They would find it very difficult to believe. They can't fathom this. They say, I have faith in a lot of things, but out-of-body experiences, no, I can't believe that. It's never happened to me, and I can't believe that it's ever happened to anyone else. Could you give us anything that you've come across in a specific example, in the research that has been done, that kind of made you, obviously you put a lot of time and energy into it. You have to be, if not a total believer, you've got some strong inclinations. Could you relate some experiences that would make you at least create a reasonable doubt in the mind of someone that's listening?
Yes, that's an interesting question also because it has different ways of answering it. For one thing, I would like to say that we usually kind of talk about these out-of-body experiences in terms of if they are real or if they are fantasy. One way of looking at that and kind of going over those distinctions is kind of study the OB as an human experience. Just as we study dreams or as we study fantasy, the OB has its own right to be studied, no matter if it's a fantasy or something real. So in that way, I'm extremely interested in it as a human manifestation. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, there is the possibility, at least theoretically, that the out-of-body experience seems to be exactly what the people are feeling, kind of something going out of the body at the moment of the experience. We generally have kind of a contrast between those ideas that are sometimes called externalization models, because something is externalized, something goes out of the body, and other theories that mainly propose that the experience is a hallucination, sometimes created using our imagery and memory abilities or using other type of resources that we may have mentally. So, you can do those type of contrasts. But there are some things that have been usually mentioned to suggest that the experience is really something going out. Are a group of cases that don't seem to be very frequent, but they're extremely interesting, that we can describe as OB apparitions. Those are cases where the person has the out-of-body experience. He or she travels to a distant place, perceives the environment, and later can report on it. But also at that place where he visits, there is another person not having an out-of-OB in his normal state, and he can see this person as kind of an apparition. The person having the experience feels he's there and he's seen there by another person. In even less cases, there are collective observations, like two or more persons are in that place and they can see the apparition of this person having the experience. If the person is conscious of being seen and of seeing the environment and later recollects all that, and everybody can check later and find that everybody remembers seeing apparition and the person that was an apparition there remembers being there. So those cases sometimes are very difficult to explain in other ways. Also, in parapsychology, there are always, many other explanations, such as kind of a telepathic explanation some people propose for those cases. The person having the experience kind of, in a way, projects a telepathic image to those observers. The observers think that the person is there, but they are only receiving a telepathic impulse. And then the person at the same time has the fantasy of being out and visiting the place, but it's really not there. That's kind of another argument generally used in parapsychology, and very difficult to deal with because you cannot really reject it. It always is possible in theoretical terms. But nonetheless, I will say that those cases are suggestive. At least they should keep our mind open that something may be projecting to some place. There are also some studies that have tried to make some type of physical detection of the person who he or she is out. And generally, they have not been very successful. Modern studies, we really have practically, we can say, two modern studies of that sort of thing, using instruments to detect some sort of strange vibration at the moment the person is there. There have been some interesting recordings, or sometimes using animal responses. There was a study where they tried to measure changes in the behavior of a small cat while a person was trying to project to a specific location. So in that specific experiment, there were some interesting changes in the behavior of the cat that suggest that he may have been responding to some paranormal influence. But these are very erratic and experiments that have not been replicated, so we really cannot be very sure. Much work really needs to be done here.
What about the implications of all of this? I think it's fantastic. It's six of one, half a dozen of the other. I think your answer was excellent in that if so what if it's just a fantasy? It's something that a lot of people are experiencing, so it's interesting in its own regard. But what are the implications for people? Most people identify themselves with their physical bodies, and they look
Yes.
at their hands. They look at themselves in mirrors a lot. If they walk down a street and there's a mirror in a store window, they'll turn and look at themselves and they say, "That's me." They become very comfortable with that physical entity. What implications does it have for human beings to separate themselves from their physical bodies?
Well, one thing that we can see from the persons that after they have the experience is that many of them are strong believers that they can survive death. That their life, their consciousness really does not depend on their physical body or on their brain functions. They firmly believe that they have been out there, that they know that life really and consciousness is independent of physiological functions. So, that's an important conclusion. In fact, these cases, if we can somehow, demonstrate that independence, it will be a very strong argument for the separation, perhaps, of the mind-brain argument, has been going since the beginnings of psychology. But this, methodologically is really very difficult. At least it shows the possibility that our consciousness maybe still function without the physical body. Then, of course, the survival issue. So many people speculate that actual survival of death, as I was saying before, is kind of a permanent out-of-body experience, and the afterlife is kind of an OBE existence, that you kind of continue in that way in different planes of existence, or depending how people conceptualize those things. But in terms of the argument of if something really survives, the out-of-body experience may be relevant kind of to show the possibility that that's a possible way of survival, how persons may continue without their body.
Getting in touch with your soul.
Yeah, you could put it in that way, yes. But again, these are mostly speculations and ideas that our research just, points sometimes into those directions, but there may be many ways to make interpretations of the available information. Still, in the OBE researchers are very much divided. There are those that feel that something really goes out and is related to survival of death. Others take mostly psychological approaches. They say that it's kind of a function of memory skills and imagery skills, and it has nothing to do with survival, and that we really don't go out. So, the opinion is very much divided, and research is continually going on. I would say that the main trend perhaps are people that try to be neutral about some of the theories and just want to find what is different and what is characteristic of the persons having the experience, hoping that in the long run we may tackle again the important question if something really goes out or not.
Are these people neurotic or are they stable people?
I think the research that has been done generally seems to show that they are stable. They are not abnormal by psychiatric standards. Only one study at one time showed that they seem to be more neurotic than the general population, but was only a single study that has not been replicated, and several others after that, trying to measure hysteric and psychotic type of behaviors, have not been able to distinguish them. Have not been able to identify any specific type of pathology with them. In fact, even in one study, group of persons having the OB were compared with persons from the general population and with psychiatry patients, and the persons having the OB came out to be the best ones adapted to normal life. So it seems, that everything points out that it's not related to pathology.
What is the cord? What is that all about? Is there something called an astral cord or something of that sort?
Yeah, traditionally in the theosophical and spiritualist literature, they kind of talk about the cord or the silver cord, astral cord. It's supposed to be kind of a cord of a subtle matter that connects the physical body with the subtle or astral body that some people claim that is going out during the experiences. So many people have different functions for the cord. They mainly claim that if you cut the cord, that will mean instant death. That the cord is kind of a way of conveying energy and a life principle from that body, the subtle body, to the physical body, and maintaining life in the physical body. But the one interesting thing about the cord is that we seem to have reports of it mostly in cases from selected populations and in the old reports. Like the highest percentage in compilation of these cases is 20%. And it's interesting, this compilation was done by Robert Krukal, a British geologist that recently died. And most of his cases were drawn from the spiritualist and theosophical literature. If you compare that 20% with more recent surveys, you will find that some persons, like in my own survey here in California, I found no reports of it. Others find things like 3.5 or 9%, but much less than the 20%. So it may suggest that that population that Krukal was dealing with may have been biased in some way or may not represent the whole range of the phenomena.
This is Infinity. Remember to keep your mind open and listen to your heart. I'm Charlie Seraphin. Thank you for listening.